Somebody much smarter than I is here, Dr. David Ripplinger, back with us on the program. And David Ripplinger is going to be giving some of the addresses today at 12:40. He's going to keynote the session on putting a price on carbon, and also is participating in the food and agribusiness perspectives on this as well. Nice to have you back. How are you?
I'm doing great, Scott. Thanks.
So my little monologue there in response to the texture, you agree, disagree? What would you say?
The way I think about climate and agriculture is that producers don't get to decide. The market is deciding, regulators are deciding, and then farmers get to decide how they want to respond. And unfortunately, their choice set's becoming more limited or more strict. But for me, my goal is to educate them on what's happening and why, how they might respond, and give them the information they need to make a good decision, but leave that decision in their hands.
What is your sense of the agriculture community and the buy-in at this point? Is it still a lot of skepticism?
Well, a lot of questions. It's a really complicated issue. There's a lot of ways in which folks want to engage agriculture, which are all new. And so going through any of those many different programs or possibilities is really tough. And things are changing from day to day. But they're definitely interested. And, you know, for better or worse, one of the things within agriculture is it's being framed primarily as an opportunity, which is different than some other industries. And so farmers are interested. They're thinking of ways that they might be able to generate additional revenue. And in many cases too, you know, as things are changing, keeping access to certain markets, you know, as certain climate disclosure laws come on board, if you don't do certain things, you're not going to have access to certain markets.
What producers do you not seeing opportunities for in this space? Who does it hurt?
The ones who are going to get hurt are the ones who don't get engaged. They're the ones who may grow different crops, who may not have the advantages that other crops do, because you have to do a lot of homework. And that's what's really tough about this. You know, individual producers do a lot of things, but they don't necessarily spend weeks calculating certain numbers. And that's what's being asked. And so those folks are being put at a distinct disadvantage. And in North Dakota, we produce a lot of food crops. And so we have some of those minor food crops where you need to have this critical mass to get this homework done, or you're going to be on the outside.
Well, that's why we need a professor in the bioenergy department at NDSU, right? I mean, you're doing the thinking for the farmers and giving them this information is your goal here, right?
Yeah, that's part of my job.
Yeah, interesting. Talk about pricing carbon. I know you're going to talk about that later with one of the panels here. How do you put a price tag on this?
Yeah, well, it's really tough. And so we have a number of different programs, which are very different from one another. The prices that they offer, if they're even known, are not consistent. What they're asking farmers to do is very different for each of these programs. And so what I'm going to do during the session is simply walk them through some of these different cases to give them an understanding of where the prices are, where where they're coming from, how it can get back to them, how they can factor that into their decision, which is a bit of a tall task, but, you know, really, really important. Unfortunately, we don't have a single price for carbon or, you know, a single rate for changing carbon. And so each farmer has to some extent, navigate this on their own.
So I know when we talked earlier with the folks that are working on this, on the ecosystem of how to get, you know, the pricing straight. But if, you know, let's take an example. Summit Carbon Solutions builds a pipeline, and the pipeline takes CO2, man-made CO2 off these ethanol plants, brings it up to North Dakota for either sequestration or ultimately enhanced oil recovery. All right. So and by the way, they're partnering with plants not only in North Dakota but also in South Dakota and Iowa as well. So they got a lot of carbon. If something like that were here today, would that increase or decrease the price of carbon?
So that's a great question. So I mean, the driver in that is tax policy. The driver in that is also state level low carbon fuel policy. If Summit was in operation today, I don't know if it would necessarily impact the value of carbon because that system's somewhat closed. But what it would do is create a lot of value for different parties. Obviously, Summit itself, the participating ethanol refineries, and the value, maybe not in dollars and cents, does come back to the producer, but it's having that viable local processor, that partner locally who will accept some of their grain.
And Brazil is ahead of I always hear that Brazil is ahead of the game. What does that mean?
Well, Brazil is dominated by biofuels. Their sugarcane ethanol industry is big. Their corn ethanol industry is growing rather quickly. They've understood nationally the importance of low carbon fuels. Something that I think the biofuel industry in the United States knew pretty well, but Brazil has been very much on the cutting edge, thinking consistently, how do we get that smaller carbon footprint? And so that global competitiveness is really quite important. And if we do things right, this is another opportunity for us, because typically when it comes to that even playing field, we can win.
Many people say, okay, these are the rules of the road today. We're going to play in the game. But just like Lucy took the football out from Charlie Brown when he was about to kick it, what happens down the road if they change the rules of the game? What do you say to somebody that's concerned about entering this arena because of what possibly could come?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so typically my recommendation, a general recommendation, is don't enter into long-term agreements because there's so much uncertainty. The price of carbon could rise or it could fall. The offers that are on the table today may not be particularly generous, and locking yourself into a specific commitment really does tie your hands. At the same time, a lot of these farmers are going to soon realize that their carbon footprint matters, that, if they're selling carbon offsets to name the corporation, great, but all of a sudden they have a gap within their own business because they've taken away this low-hanging fruit, this great opportunity to reduce emissions themselves.
Yeah, very interesting. And the challenge in all of this is I'm learning so much all the time by all these conversations. But I see a fair amount of opposition, mostly on the climate action side of this, that's such a political argument. And I would argue that much of it is poppycock, right? And so do a lot of North Dakotans. New poll out today says that. Yeah, there's opportunity in it.
Yeah, great question. So the example I always give, as North Dakota farmers, we grow a lot of crops, including those many the producers themselves don't consume. So if the folks want garbanzo beans, you grow garbanzo beans. There is a bigger, different, higher level discussion, that social discussion, that political discussion, which I'm saying still takes place. But if the market opportunity is there, it's natural to take advantage.
And if this solution isn't available, is there legitimate threats to modern agriculture and our energy industry?
Well, the energy industry, absolutely, without question. And agriculture in and of itself, we have a large carbon footprint because we produce food for the world. Agriculture has to be engaged and smart about this. And that's not going to change anytime soon. And in fact, the importance of it is just going to grow, certainly year by year, maybe not day by day, but year by year.
Fascinating conversation as always. Thanks for your good work at NDSU. Professor, bioenergy economist at NDSU, Dr. David Ripplinger, with us on the program. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good to see you.